Okay, so I'm Ollie. I'm from Bond. I'd like to thank you all for coming to the webinar today. The webinar is entitled Total Reward Strategies. It's an insight from 2025. It's a 1 hour webinar. It's in collaboration with our partner Birches, who are fantastic and have done a few of these webinars for us, talking about all things kind of pay and reward related specifically to the sector. We will be recording it, so don't worry too much about taking notes. We'll send you the recording and the slides after the webinar. Please do feel free to use the Q&A box to ask any questions because there will be a Q&A at the end. I'm going to hand you over to Bianca now. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Ollie. Let me just share my screen. Bear with me. All right. Okay. So hi, everyone. Welcome to Birches Group's webinar on total reward strategies tailored for NGOs in the UK, and also how NGOs in the UK are currently managing workforce and pay. Right. So joining me today is one of Birches Group's partners. Some of you might know him. It's Sir Warren Heaps. And we also have Beverly Stewart. Beverly is the Interim Global Director of People, Capability, and Culture for Women International. So in this session, first, I'll be walking you through the results of our most recent pulse survey on how NGOs navigated the funding pressures that happened in 2025 and any changes that were made to compensation, to workforce, staff engagement activities, and so forth. Warren will then discuss the results of our latest October 2025 UK NGO survey, our observations, what they all mean for strategies NGOs can consider going into 2026. And finally, Beverly will be speaking to the experience of Women International, how they managed the changes that happened last year, and how they utilize survey data to manage compensation and their objectives for 2026. And we'll also allot some time at the end, as Ollie mentioned at the end of the session, for any questions you all may have before we wrap up. Okay. So you all are aware that in 2025, that was a challenging year. Due to funding pressures, many NGOs, and I don't need to tell this group, many NGOs had to make tough decisions, including layoffs, furloughs, pay freezes, and promotion suspensions, to name a few. We conducted a pulse survey to understand how those decisions played out across different NGOs. And now our survey it's not limited to NGOs in the UK. It also includes large international NGOs in the US. This is to ensure that we achieve a more robust sample. So the survey covers three key areas there. So the first would be decisions on workforce changes. Second, how those decisions were made, including the criteria and the process that were considered. And the third would be the measures the organizations took to support staff and keep operations running. All right, so in summary, the results showed that in 2025, restructuring was the norm. 86% of respondents implemented some form of restructuring, including layoffs, reclassification, or role redesign. 53% made changes to pay and benefits, including pay freezes, pay cuts, changes to allowances and benefits, and reduced work hours. And 53% have also paused promotions and staff development activities. These changes were applied across office locations, whether they were headquarters, regional offices, or country offices, as well as across employee groups, whether staff were locally hired or international staff across various grade levels. So on changes made to the workforce, most respondents reported restructuring initiatives were implemented mainly through furloughs, layoffs, and organization and job redesign. In terms of implementing those restructuring initiatives, furloughs and layoffs were the closest to completion, while organization and job redesign initiatives have progressed a bit more slowly. All right, so in terms of implementing those restructuring initiatives, furloughs and layoffs were the closest to or I think Ollie, it would be the next slide. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so in terms of implementing those restructuring initiatives, furloughs and layoffs were the closest to completion, while organization and job redesign initiatives have progressed more slowly. Next slide, please. So in terms of office locations, or sorry, I think that was the last slide. So in terms of office locations that were impacted also by the restructuring initiatives, a lot of it were on the headquarters and regional offices in terms of the most impacted, while layoffs were mostly headquarters and country offices. So in terms of employee groups, or what we in BG, in Birches Group, call job clusters, so mainly the brown bars there, they represent general or operational job roles, which are typically your drivers, your messengers, your cleaners, your receptionists. And then the purple bar, those would be your process execution roles. So those are your program officers, accountants, bookkeepers, and team leads. While the green bar, those would be your program specialists and managers. And the red bar would be your leadership roles at the highest levels that are in charge of organization or policy design, program delivery, and organizational leadership. So in terms of all these job clusters that were impacted by various restructuring initiatives, you can find which you can find indicated there at the bottom. If you compare all the job levels, the general job cluster or the operational roles were hit the least. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so in terms of criteria used to determine layoffs, job and location were the main criteria for most respondents. Other criteria such as performance ratings, skills and qualifications, seniority, and other factors were also considered but were not as important. Next slide, please. And then, so when it came to approaches to severance pay, sorry, back 2 slides, I think. There. When it came to approaches to severance pay, statutory benefits were the most common approach among the respondents. Other approaches such as outplacement assistance, employer-sponsored insurance, referrals, and early retirement incentives were also reported by but only by a few respondents. Next slide, please. All right, so before we go to the next section of the poll survey results, maybe we can pull up our first poll. So we'd like to do a poll question here. So you should see that pop up on your screens. So we'd love to know your answer to this question. In your organization, what restructuring initiative took place, or what did you apply, and where do they stand today? All right, looks like org redesign is the most, in terms of in progress, it's org redesign. In terms of completed restructuring initiatives, it's layoffs. I think that would be the most. I think it's pretty consistent with our pulse survey, more or less. So thank you, everyone. All right, so on pay and benefits. So as a result of the limited funding limited funding last year, the results of the survey showed that most organizations had to make adjustments to compensation and benefits. Over 80% of respondents reported that they were forced to freeze or reduce pay and benefits for their staff. In terms of actions taken to pay and benefits, salary freeze and benefits reduction, right there, were the most common. Job levels were not considered in the application of these adjustments, and these adjustments were applied to all employee groups or job clusters uniformly. But only a few respondents reported salary and work hour reductions, as well as applying an allowance freeze. All right, next slide, please. Okay. So maybe we can do another poll. Maybe we can pull up our second poll. So the question on your screen right now is, did your organization make changes to any pay and benefits as a result of the funding pressures in 2025? Salary freeze. It's pretty consistent, everyone. By far, salary freeze. Any more answers? All right. Okay, so for the next slide, on changes to staff development activities. So our survey results showed that most of the respondents also chose to freeze staff development programs and promotions. But while there have been freezes on staff development and promotions, staff engagement activities were still maintained, particularly around health and well-being activities, which you'll see here. A few also reported not making any changes at all to staff engagement activities. Next slide, please. And then on sustaining staff morale and support to prevent burnout, all but 2 respondents cited regular leadership communication. And the top 5 approaches that were reported all emphasized communication between the organization and staff. And employee counseling was also mentioned by many of the respondents. Right, next slide, please. Right, so lastly, most respondents also reported restructuring the teams to ensure capacity for key development program areas, as well as a reprioritization of programs as the main approaches to support staff and prevent burnout. All right, so since this is the last slide before I pass this over to Warren, maybe we can do one last poll. So for the third question, in your organization, were there any changes made to employee engagement activities to support staff? Interesting. So very consistent, also pausing learning and development programs, but also many not making any changes at all. So I think it's pretty consistent with the pulse survey that we ran. So thank you everyone for your responses. Maybe I can now turn this over to Warren to walk us through the results of the October 2025 UK NGO survey.
Thank you, Bianca. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to look at some data, starting with the next slide. This is a list of the 49 organizations that reported data in our October publication of the UK survey. And this reflects actually a steady increase in the size of the survey. So we're grateful for all of you who might be on this call who participated, and of course, invite the rest of you to join. You can flip to the next one. We're going to look at the data 2 ways. This is a constant sample of 39 of those 49 who are in the 2024 survey and in the 2025 survey. So this is really going to capture, for the same group of employers year over year, what happened in terms of market data. And you can see there were little bit under 2%, actually 1.9% on an incumbent weighted basis of an increase in pay from 2024 to 2025. So that's very modest, maybe keeping pace with inflation, maybe a little bit lower. And most of the increase is actually at at the maximum level, with the exception of BG11, where there's an increase at the minimum. The way you read this graph, in case it's confusing, the dark green and light green bars represent the range of pay in the market, from minimum to maximum. And then the brown lines represent the 2024 minimum and maximum. So you can compare the range in 2025 versus the range in 2024. Okay, flip to the next one. Now, if we look at all 49 participants in the survey, then it actually comes out to be a 5.11% increase. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody increased 5%. Probably it's closer to the 2% number. But you can see in the red boxes, most of the increase that's significant was identified in level 6 and level 7. Those are senior level support roles, which averaged 6.8%, and entry level professional roles at 9 and 10, which averaged about 4%. There is a big increase in BG14, but there's not much data at that level, so I wouldn't rely on that. Next slide. One of the aspects of total compensation, which we always emphasize to our clients, is the importance of non-salary elements in compensation. Now, in the UK, it's not as common as it is in the field locations. Nevertheless, we found 29% provide some sort of complimentary food and beverages. This could be as simple as a tea service in the office. 22% provided recreational benefits, and 16% provided some sort of short-term incentives. The other benefits that are listed here in gray were much less common. Although the miscellaneous category is the second highest, which is a no-no in graphs, but that's predominantly related to benefits for remote or hybrid work arrangements, which is clearly a trend that's continuing post-COVID. Next slide. So in thinking about what to do with your compensation and benefits program during 2026, it likely will be another challenging year for the sector. And I think it goes without saying that you need to have a good strategy. And that strategy really consists of informed and defensible recruitment decisions. So using data to develop offers for new candidates, rather than asking for salary history, which probably isn't even legal anymore. Try and avoid blanket freezes in order to keep your pay and terms and conditions for your staff competitive. And look at non-salary elements as a way of supplementing total compensation if you're a little bit cash poor. We're going to look at each of these in a little bit more detail, starting with the next slide. So, of course, you need to anticipate your budgetary challenges and model your best case scenarios and your worst case scenarios and the ones in between, and tie that to your funding outcomes, and use market data to inform these models so that you're going to management with credible information rather than guesses. The market is going to move over time. It's going to move more slowly than it used to move. But I think that many organizations are going to be faced with retention challenges if you continue to freeze pay. So I would suggest unfreezing and trying to do pay increases as best you can. Finance is your friend. HR and finance need to work very closely together in order to develop budgets that reflect both the funding realities for the organization as well as the realities of what's happening in the market. Next slide. Your donors and other stakeholders need to also be well informed about these issues. I mean, you need to justify the numbers to your funders. with numbers, not narratives. Saying that your program manager is paid at the 50th percentile of your target market is much more compelling than our staff is experienced and hardworking. So get more into the data, and we're happy to help you with that if you need it. Identify which data can support your funding requests to various donors. Talk to your donors, try and understand what they're looking for, what kinds of justifications and documentation they're seeking. Each donor is a little bit different in terms of what they require and what they like to see. And make sure that your leadership and your board is going to support your compensation investments by providing good documentary external data to support the decisions that you recommend. Next one. There's going to be more scrutiny in the future on pay equity. The EU pay equity legislation is coming into effect in July. I know the UK has similar legislation for a long time. So use market data to comply, of course, with the Equal Pay Act, but also look at what's happening outside of your country, and especially in the EU, but even outside the EU, because the pay equity bug is spreading on a global basis, even if it's not official legislation in many places. Employees and other stakeholders are expecting transparency. You should be prepared to explain if you have a pay gap, how you set pay, how you adjust pay, what data sources you're using, and whether or not you're in compliance with the concept of equal pay for equal work. By using data instead of other approaches like favoritism or no process at all, you're going to increase the amount of trust that staff have in your organization. That's going to also improve retention, and generally employees will be much more satisfied if you're clear and honest with them about how compensation works. Use tools such as our community skills program to assess experience and knowledge and link those assessments to pay progression. So, some of you may have heard about this tool. It's a tool that helps companies assist managers in managing pay within a pay range. How do you know whether somebody should be on the low end or the high end of the pay range or just in the middle? And how do you assess them objectively using criteria other than years of service? And this would help in the conversations that managers should have with staff about how their pay was calculated and how their pay was adjusted. So HR should be supporting managers actively in how those conversations go. I think that was all at my last slide. And now we're going to turn it over to Beverly, who's going to talk about the experience within Women for Women.
Okay, thank you. Can you move on to the next slide, please? So we did a full engage with Birches. We did a kind of review in July, and also kind of like the Birches October 2025, which was full UK NGO sample. Women for Women's pay philosophy is targeted around 50th percentile, which is really important for us to take into consideration. That's not only in the UK, but also globally. We found Women for Women UK is behind the market 50th percentile by 13.7% on average, which actually was quite a surprise to us. The range of competitiveness. So Women for Women's is positioned around the 28th percentile at minima and the 22nd percentile at the maxima. indicating the gap is not only at entry, but compounds at most experienced levels. And why the maxima is really important is when the top of the range sits materially below market, it weakens the long-term value proposition for experienced staff and can restrict credibility progression within the grade, raising the likeliness of external moves. On to the next slide, please. So the risks, turnover, retention and operational disruption. So in 2025, UK's turnover was the highest than other women-for-women offices and the organisational average. Where we have programs, we always kind of like expect to have a high turnover, but UK was actually one of the highest. We're also not reliably holding the intended 50th percentile position, with the most common concerns at the top end of the range and in the broader market view. And so this is consistent with staff mobility driven by pay competitiveness and indicates a real risk of continued losses if we do not address the structural misalignment of the pay. And that explains why our retention rates and hiring pressures were consistent in 2025. The impact it had was that vacancies and hiring delays reduced continuity, especially in specialist roles. And the high turnover drives recruitment fees, onboarding time, productivity loss, and leadership time. So it has had a big disruption within our UK office. Please, can you move on to the next slide? So the financial and risk management considerations, 2025 context, salary and promotion freezes limited progression and widen the market drift. We also, the risk trade-off, holding pay flat can actually reduce cost short-term, but increase attribution risks in the long term. The model pay impact alongside vacancy time, backfill and revamping up our costs was quite considerable. And the equity risk, managed compression and keeping staff within bands for their grades. So stage implementation, we need to consider, for example, apply lowest pay and lower bands staff first, whilst keeping the structure approved for the full adjustment plan. So we are actually in discussion currently about what we're going to be doing, and we'll look at different scenarios to kind of like think about how we actually are going to increase salaries across all the grades and what is going to be the stages that we do that. We also have to really consider continuing to monitor the UK retention and hiring outcomes after this implementation. Next slide, please. So implications for 2026. So how our pay benefits and total rewards approach has evolved. So we have agreed on paying around the 50th percentile, and the Birches benchmarking has made the degree of drift visible and quantifiable. In 2025 and currently 2026, the organisation is operating under salary constraint measures, including a salary and promotions freeze, shifting focus from annual increases to maintaining fairness, affordability, and transparency under tight conditions. So when it comes to looking at our budget planning for 2026, we've already done that. And now we're having to kind of consider what are we going to do to actually bring UK in line with the 50th percentile. Rather than a general cost of living adjustment across offices, the approach described here frames pay actions as a target expectation for the UK. And we don't want to actually have internal drifts and internal turnover signals aligned. So adopting the 2025-26 salary scales and applying consistency, band rules, strengthening how pay is set, progressed and governed, reducing an ad hoc outcome and supporting internal equity. So the 2026 planning linkages, talent management, fundraising strategy, which we actually are doing now. We're revising that and we're looking at implementing that at the end of March. And our budget reforecasts, we will be doing that again at the end of March. Position compensation is one part of the broader values proposition, supporting retention through clearer progression, workforce stability and delivery capacity. Next slide, please. So the continued implications are these shifts provide the context for 2026 implications, treat the 50th percentile philosophy as the reference point for the UK ranges and incumbent positioning market, explicitly how the organisation will interpret around the 50th. As the October 2025 full market view shows, the greatest concern at range maxima is at the range of maxima. 2026 planning needs to preserve credible within grade progression, so experienced staff are not forced to exit the organisation to realise market value. Budget forecasts and scenario planning reflect UK salary scales, adopt and any incumbent alignment costs in 2026 budget forecasts, stress test affordability under different income scenarios. So the fundraising strategy, use the fundraising strategy to articulate how stabilising UK capacity reduces delivery risks, improves capacity planning and protects income generation activities, e.g. reducing repeated backfill cycles in key roles. And talent management integration. So after the 2025-26 quarter salary promotion freeze, 2026 needs to be a clear approach to progression signals, developing internal mobility, promotion readiness that aligns with updated ranges and avoids over-reliance on counter offers. So workforce risk dashboards, we need to continue to define the metric leadership and so that we review to ensure our strategy is reducing the risk and the turnover for UK. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Beverly. We're now opening the floor for any questions on today's session, but I do see 2 questions already from Catherine. Thank you, Catherine. Really good questions there, maybe for everyone's reference. Her comment was, I use a general rule of more or less 10% of the market, and we are in the right zone when it comes to paying an individual. This more or less 10% sound. Is it sound? So Warren, you want to take us through your answer?
Yeah, I typed an answer, but I can read it. So keep in mind that the market is not a single value. There's a range from minimum to maximum for every job. And so what we would recommend is that you should definitely pay at least at the minimum, and ideally closer to your desired percentile market position. And ranges can range, no pun intended, from 30 to even 70% from min to max. And so that 10%, in a 30% range, that 10% off the midpoint, for example, would still be within the range. In a 70% range, it would certainly be within the range, even with a reference point that's below the midpoint. So think about where you want your organization to be, and look at the data more broadly than just a single value.
Right. Another question from Catherine. Based on the presentation, is it fair to say that the average annual salary increase in the UK for 2025 was 1.9%? And I think this is usually the go-to of many of our survey participants. So Warren, care to elaborate?
So the way that 1.9% that I mentioned was calculated, first of all, it's based on the 39 organizations that were in both the 2024 and 2025 survey. And then what we do is we look at the change at the minimum and the change at the maximum between those two surveys by grade. We take the average of those changes by grade, and then we calculate a weighted average based on the number of incumbents. So for example, if there was a big change in BG12, but there's only, 17 incumbents in BG12, there's a smaller change in BG5, and there's 450 incumbents in BG5, that BG5 data is going to be much more significant in the calculation than the BG12 data. So essentially what we're measuring with that number is, on average, how much did salary ranges change? And in this case, what we found is that they went up approximately 2%. But it was definitely not equal. Some grades didn't change very much at all. I mean, if you look at the graph, you'll see they're all kind of close. And if you just look for in the graph, if you look for the places where the values on the vertical bars are higher than the lines, those are the ones that changed.
Thanks, Warren. Maybe you can talk more about voluntary redundancy schemes. Would you normally say that these are successful approaches when in getting organizations to where they want to be? That's to you, Warren. Yeah.
I don't really know. That's not one of the things that I've studied. I mean, my gut would tell me that voluntary redundancy is definitely a way to reduce headcount without firing people who still want their job. Maybe it's a way of getting people who are kind of close to leaving anyway to leave. Maybe Beverly, you may have more experience with this than I do.
Yeah. Okay, so for woman, we actually decided not to make any redundancies or offer voluntary redundancies. What we decided was to actually, if someone was leaving, we would then strategically think about whether we needed that role within that department. And so we actually kind of decided to get rid of some roles within departments when the person naturally left the organization. And so that has, in 2025, definitely in the UK, we've actually kind of reduced by about, I would say, 5 roles within the UK office, which actually has had a significant impact on our teams, who, what we kind of keep our teams focused on with reduction of resources. But we've also then looked at, okay, so what are the key initiatives that we need to be focusing on to achieve our strategy? And so we've been looking at that balance that we needed to do. And I think we also had a new chief exec start in October 2025, and they felt very strongly that not to make any redundancies and to make our, kind of like refocus our organization on developing a new fundraising strategy as we've had the big changes that have happened in 2024 and 2025. And so we will be kind of reviewing that at the end of March, implementing that strategy and then looking at where we position ourselves again and what we're needing to do. And hopefully we will not be thinking about redundancies.
Thank you, Beverly. We have another question here, and I guess this is to you, Warren. Would you have some guidance on what the average increase might be for this year to 2027 if it was previously an approximate of 1.9%?
Hold on a second while I get my crystal ball. That's a hard question to answer. I would suspect it won't be less than 1.9, and maybe likely be closer to 2.5, as organizations maybe come out of financial troubles and find that the funds are flowing better. I mean, if that doesn't happen, and I guess it depends on where your donors are and if they've restored cutbacks or if you found alternate sources of funds. I don't think that it's sustainable to keep pay freezes in place for much longer than a year. So I suspect that any organizations that didn't have pay increases in 2025 are going to be forced to do it in 2026, or they're going to find that their organization is going to shrink maybe a little bit more than they want it to. That said, organizations are getting smaller, and then they're more able to provide pay increases to a smaller number, right? I mean, the pot of money is shrinking, so you divide it up by fewer heads. So we don't normally do a salary increase survey. What we've found over the years is that if you look at historical data and project those trends, you can usually predict what's going to happen. I don't know if we've been doing the UK survey long enough to be able to do that in the UK, but in all of the country locations, our trends tool allows users to answer I call it the mutual fund question. If the market behaves the way it normally does, and there's not any kind of exceptional things that are happening, like economic disruptions, you can project using 3 different types of regression analysis in order to predict, quote unquote, predict the likely outcome of pay movement in that market. So if anyone wants information on how that works, just reach out to us.
Right. And before I get to Graham's question, Warren, do you think it's a good practice to pay to freeze pay for senior roles but give increases to junior roles? And I know this is a case-to-case basis, I would say. Really depends on the situation for your organization, but more or less based on your experience.
Yes. I mean, I think that the simple answer is, people on the lower end of the spectrum are going to be much more dramatically impacted by pay freezes than people on the higher end. Your higher paid staff are likely to have more options. That's not to say that they're not going to be harmed by a pay freeze. They are, but your lowest level paid folks are going to be harmed more. And so if you have limited resources, and look, within the NGO sector, there's a high value placed on equity. I would argue that in this case, equity should be bring the lower end up first, rather than trying to spread the pot so thin that everybody only gets a little tiny piece. Right. And it's not just in the NGO sector. I came from private sector, and when we had budget constraints, salary increases were often higher at the lower levels. Also, it's the way percentages work, right? You can get a lower percentage of a higher number and still get the same amount.
Thanks, Warren. Graham's question, I would be interested to hear more about those that used furlough as a way to make savings. How was it applied and for how long, and what was the position of the organizations that used that scheme? Good question. Honestly, Graham, we didn't ask that question when we ran the pulse survey. It was just a survey to know what was the practice at the time during 2025, what changes were applied. But I think this is a good question to consider for the next pulse survey, because I think now, a year in, we would know more about the impact of the changes that we did, or the changes that the NGOs did to the staff. So this is definitely something that we'll consider for the next pulse survey, which I think would still be good to know, especially somewhere in the middle of 2026. Okay. One last question before I guess we close out this session. For those who can afford to give out maybe bonuses, right? In light of the current situation for many NGOs, how do you balance that, giving out bonuses when there's obviously limited budget for increases, but also you would still like to motivate staff? So what do you think, Warren?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'd be interested in knowing what other people think.
Okay. All right. So before we wrap up, just want to say that Birches Group's 2026 compensation and benefit survey as of April will be out next month. And this goes for the UK and also all other countries that we survey. If you'd like to see a sample report for those that are not in our survey and would have questions about participation, you can email info@birchesgroup.com or contact your representative at Bond, and they can put you in touch with us. Bond members participating for the first time can enjoy a 10% discount on our survey fees. So we'd love for you guys to take advantage of that. And one last question here. Do you measure other benefits like flexible working or 4 days a week?
We don't really measure it.
No.
We actually capture what the standard work week is, and if it varies by level, that information shows in the survey, but we have not historically captured flexible working or 4-day weeks. I mean, we capture a lot of stuff, but that's not one of them.
All right.
Wait, Bianca, before you wrap up, do you want to throw the link to the quiz in the chat?
I will, and also it's actually going out in the post-webinar email that Bond will be sending you all. So I think it's better that way. So please look out for that. It's our HR effectiveness assessment. It just takes 10 minutes to complete, and with that assessment, you'll find where you have gaps in your HR systems, starting points about where you should, what's the most pressing issues, which areas you're already doing well. So it's just a good diagnostic about where your HR function stands. And this starts from recruitment or job evaluation, job design, all the way through performance, right? So it captures the whole or the 4 key areas of HR. So we'd love for you guys to take that assessment. And that's going to come out, I think, within 24 hours after this webinar, along with the slides. All right. So I think that's all for today's webinar. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and hopefully you can join our next webinar soon. Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.